Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about, and this is an extension of a video I did a couple of days ago, about the black activist narrative in the United States, one that's being now widely used around the world and very generously funded and supported by the globalist cabal, who in turn are forcing white Western taxpayer dollars into this activism, which is all part of driving racial division in the West. Even in countries where they have a very small, even tiny black population, blacks are being imported as quickly as the globalists can manage it, and then as soon as the blacks arrive, this social division propaganda is being spread around. So we can be under no illusion that it's being done purposefully and willfully. Now, the whole thing's really been borrowed from the United States, black activism that we can see from the 1950s and going on to the present day, and that model and that dynamic and that methodology has been spread around the world as it's proved to be very successful in the United States. Now, I come back to the Marxists, the Soviet Union and the communist countries generally were extremely keen to exploit this racial division. And Soviet activists used to come around to the West, and they used to come out with the most incredible tall stories. Did you know that millions of Negro blacks, American blacks, have moved to Russia because it's so equal? Everyone's so equal. It's an equal society. It's a communist. Everybody owns everything. It's so equal. So all the black people in the world are moving to Russia because of the equality. Of course, it was a total lie, but a useful one to get the gullible uni students and high school kids, things like that. And really that methodology of stirring up racial division and racial hatred and white guilt is still going today. But I want to just touch on a couple of things. When white people, or the Arabs for that matter, but when white people started showing up in Africa, they were surprised about quite a few things. The Africans didn't have the wheel. They hadn't invented the wheel, which seemed quite astonishing. They had no metallurgy and they had the most rudimentary methods of, they're still effectively a Stone Age people. Now, some were a little bit more advanced, the ones that have been in contact with the Arabs, but if the Arabs left the area for whatever reason, then the local black people, it didn't take them very long to slip back into the Stone Age habits and ways. Now, they had no written language, and there were many languages and sub-languages and so on. And a lot of the most literate Arabs really were the ones, the most literate blacks were the ones that had learned Arabic and had adopted Islam and were reading the Quran, that sort of thing. But outside of that, it was still a Stone Age gig. So they had no written history, they had no oral history, they had no writing at all, no written language, in fact. And many people don't seem to know that. But anyway, weren't blacks talking with American accents for thousands of years before today? Well, no, they weren't. So there's no written history. Now, the way the black tribes transmitted history, within their tribes and so on, was to turn them into folklore, mythological tales. The whole thing was combined into myth and folklore and embellishment and campfire stories and really entertainment, in effect, nighttime entertainment. And not if we think of, say, in the English language, Jack and the Beanstalk, or various tales, Beowulf in the German, and the list goes on of European type myths. But Europeans had a written history and a written language, and so the myths and the history and the facts all sort of diverged. They didn't combine into one, and this is what made the black sort of history or concept of history quite unique. myth, the legend, the tall, telling tall tales, the embellishments, the history, the folklore, it all combined into one, and that became the oral history tradition in effect. But separating after 1,000 years, separating fact from fiction, something that became very different in the retelling from maybe the original story it came to be. And people would be the storytellers would be their prominence in the tribe. The food they get, the amount of hot chicks that wanted to sleep with them. All of this would be just over how well they told the stories and how many people enjoyed and came to really watch their floor show. And that was very much part of the African tribal tradition. Okay, fast forward now to the slavery. Now, the Arabs used to they would cut off the sex organs of the male slaves that they would capture and sell through the slave markets. And remember, the Arabs were selling black slaves 1,000 years plus before the white folks ever turned up, longer than that. So the black populations that were exported as slaves didn't really procreate, or in the case of, say, southern India, they intermingled with the local Indians and creating a sort of another racial hybrid. So that their history got lost there, and that oral tradition and so on. Now, with the slaves going to the United States and to a lesser extent Brazil, but there as well. But this is a primarily the United States thing. The Africans that were sold as slaves to the American plantationers, I just want to highlight that only 2.5% of the total population of the United States actually owned slaves, because that was the proportion of people that owned the big plantations. And if you had a big plantation, the only labor source in the world that you could go to was in Africa, and there were lots of Arab slavers and black African slavers that were happy to fill your labor needs and requirements. So anyway, it was the amount of slaves that were going to the United States after, say, 1840 was very small. So really, you're looking at 160, 180. You're looking at most of the slaves arrived more than 200 years ago. So what's remarkable about the American black population, the African American population, is how similar the behavior is today to Africans and blacks who've never left Africa. In fact, it's hard to distinguish between the two in terms of behavior, even though the African Americans have been living next to white people for 200 years or more. Their behavior is quite similar. And again, you'd be hard pushed to find the difference. So when black people in the United States, the activists, they talk about, well, it's the black experience, or it's the black lived experience, or it's the black, and they tell tales of how all blacks are being killed by white people. White police are killing black people by the million, 100 million, billion, gazillion, 100 billion. And no story and no embellishment and no stretching of the facts. Nothing is too much in their propaganda narrative, nothing at all. So they're having riots over black police officers. But why, when there's, in Chicago, there are black gangs killing each other by the dozen every weekend? And why are there not riots over that? So there seems to be only an issue where blacks meet institutional power and don't come off so well. That alone seems to be the issue. But that's the very essence of creating social tension and division, which is clearly what the globalists are attempting to do in an effort to undermine and make white society unworkable, or Western society unworkable. The only reason blacks are being imported into Britain and Western Europe, that sort of thing, is to create the very social division that the globalists want, to create this dysfunction. So to spread this dysfunction. So we need to understand that when the blacks talk about lived experience, which something now has gone around the world, you even see it in Australia in the public service here, lived experience, borrowing directly from the black activist slogans and so on in the United States. In Australia, there's like zero Negroes in Australia. So hardly any. There's some now, but there certainly wasn't when these phrases were started to be bandied around. So the issue is, to give you an idea, I think over the last 3 months I've seen one black African in Australia. Not that they aren't around, but I've only seen one. So anyway, coming back to the point here of the African storytelling, that same concept of oral, not written storytelling is still very much part of the black experience in the United States, even today, in the Caribbean too. So this has stayed as a uniquely African behaviour that's allowed to continue. Now, even though access to wide education, the books, the learning, the whole thing is there and available, there's still an adherence to this oral tradition of storytelling and mixing myth. So when a black criminal who's committed a criminal offence is stopped by the police and runs away or struggles with police or pulls out a weapon to attack police and gets shot, in the myth making, it's still bad white institutions are oppressing the black people. But what about the crimes? It kind of doesn't matter. And so the oral tradition of myths and so on, where the emotional side of the myth takes on the bigger part, if you like, of the narrative, then that's still happening today. And I would argue the roots of that and the origins of that are in those African oral traditions, because remember, they didn't have written language. African oral traditions, which are still with us today and have been, are now, or are still rather, the backdrop of the propaganda style of the African American activists. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.